Welcome to Transformation 2.0, the podcast for change leaders. My name is Chamar Somaratna, and in each episode, we bring you real conversations with executives, innovators, and experts who are shaping the future of business. Whether you are leading a team, scaling a company, or navigating the challenges of transformation, this podcast will provide you with insights, strategies, and inspiration to drive meaningful change. Join us as we explore what it takes to lead, adapt, and thrive in an ever evolving world. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Transformation 2.0. I've got Laetitia Andrac with me today, who is the CEO and co-founder of Understanding Zoe. Welcome to the show, Laetitia.
Thank you for having me, Shamara.
Obviously, on Transformation 2.0, we talk about insights on information, in innovation, transformation, and growth for change leaders. But obviously, today's episode, we're going to be dedicated to something a little bit more personal to both Laetitia and I. And we're going to be talking about designing for neurodiversity and how inclusive operating models for future-ready organizations can make organizations more innovative and create better value for their businesses. Right? So, Laetitia, maybe instead of me introducing your background, do you want to maybe give our audience a little bit more of an introduction about your background and maybe tell us a little bit about the colorful corporate career you've had, as well as your entrepreneurial journey and the current purpose-driven enterprise that you're working on, which is Understanding Zoe?
Yes, sure. So my name is Laetitia Andrac. I am currently the co-founder and CEO of Understanding Zoe, which is a social enterprise that is all about bringing neuro inclusion from the start of life. So enabling children to be included at school, to have the same chances to be understood in daycare, in any social setting, by giving the same level of information about those children to everyone who come into the care of those children, but also help with early screening and access to early intervention. We adopt a neurodiversity affirming lens, which means we are not fixing those children. We are providing understanding and better to support and better accommodation from them, so that we avoid all of the trauma and the masking and all of those things that I personally experienced growing up as a neurodivergent woman in a world that was not built for me. And Zoe is my daughter, and she inspired the journey of creating Understanding Zoe. We created it initially for her and her own pain point, but we kept the name because Zoe means life in Greek. So Understanding Zoe in the end will be about understanding life better. So that's one thing that I'm doing currently. My background, I worked for over 7 years in strategy consulting. I was leading everything around innovation, big strategy, M&A, transformation strategy. Absolutely loved it until I burned out after 7 years, and it was an autistic burnout. And then I moved to Australia and I joined Telstra, where I was the general manager of digital transformation and then AI and data commercialization. So I worked in AI before AI was very cool. So I started working in AI in 2014 and I exited Telstra in 2021 to start my own consultancy business, which I'm still running, which is called Essential Shift, where I support entrepreneur and leader to weave together intuition and strategy.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Laetitia. And I guess a little bit of an introduction about the episode today. So we're going to be talking about inclusive design. But I think the main reason is, Laetitia, you had this experience where you attended an event that didn't really support inclusion. And you made a social media post about it, which got me started thinking, because a lot of the work that we've been doing at Anthosa is about how do we actually give organizations that operating model designs that are for the future, that actually made organizations bring everyone in the organization on the journey in terms of being able to be their best and give their best to the organization. So when I saw your post, it made me think, oh yes, actually, this is really a good topic for a podcast episode of Transformation 2.0, because we are all about how do we actually create that dynamism for the organizations of the future. So I reached out to you, and today we're going to be talking about how both obviously our experiences have led us to the understanding that how most organizations and operating models are not designed for neuro inclusivity, and how organizations of the future can actually be better adapt to that, right? So, in terms of the conversation today, we'll try to go through a few discussion points, and starting with I think the neurodivergence gap is the main first area that I want to try and address, which is more traditional designs versus inclusive models. Obviously, why typical workplace designs and events often exclude neurodivergent individuals, and obviously from your personal experience with neuro-inclusive design at events and workplaces, what are the things that you think are the areas that we should be talking more about?
Yes, thank you for asking this question, Shamara. And we could go through the beginning of the journey when you join a company, which is the hiring process. And hiring practices from the beginning are non-neuro inclusive. Because if you are autistic, for instance, and you need to take some time to answer the question, it would be way more valuable to have the question ahead of time so that you can prepare the question. And that would be beneficial for everyone anyway. That's the concept of universal design, is when you start building things for neuro inclusion or for anyone with a disability, it is beneficial for everyone as well. But this is the equity, right? It's like you give it. For us, it is mandatory, and for everyone else, it's nice to have, and it will help them perform better. So that's the third thing. It's like this kind of discriminations that happen from the hiring process, where you are expected to answer on the flight
Mm,
to some questions where sometimes, as you have different sensory processing needs, you may require a bit of time to process this information and take a bit of time to answer this question. And some autistic people like to prepare the whole point and read it out loud. And that's not that they're lazy, it's just that's what they need to
mm,
perform at their best.
mm,
The scripting can be very important for some neurodivergent individual. So that's like first thing first, the
mm,
hiring process lack inclusion. We
mm,
can go through the different processes, but that's the first one where I think lots of, and it's very simple, it's just sending out the list of questions that you will ask. And that's
mm,
why I remember when I was doing the interview for strategy consulting or for integrating the best business school in France, I loved when we had the case in advance and you could prepare the case,
mm,
because then you go and you deliver the best performance. Whereas if you get the question in the moment, really, really hard to
mm.
put your best step forward compared to neurotypical individual. So
No,
that's
that's yeah, that's a great example. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think, uh, I guess from for most organizations, this is actually they didn't do it on purpose to actually discriminate people, right? They just do it because it's not thought of that people are different and they need different ways to try and engage with the questions and the process to be able to perform differently. And so,
yeah,
like when you're trying to actually design it in a standardized way, what you get is some people who are different actually fall through the cracks, even though they might actually perform well
exactly.
above standard, right?
And there is another thing, which is when you go through the interview, the expectation is for you to look at the interviewer in the eyes. Otherwise, like, oh my gosh, they're not looking at me in the eyes, so they're lying, or so on and so forth. Where actually sustained eye contact is, for many of us neurodivergent, too much. I can't deal with sustained eye contact. And so for a long time, when I was in strategy consulting, I remember having the feedback from the partners being like, oh my gosh, you're so smart, you're so this, you're so that, but can you look at me in the eye or the client in the eye? Otherwise, they will feel like you're lying, or, your eyes moving from different direction.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's just the way I regulate myself. So it's like those kind, so you can see how from the get-go there is a barrier to access.
Mm,
And that's why there is more and more data point around this, around the fact that autistic people or ADHD neurodivergent people are less likely to have access to the same chances in
mm,
the workplace as neurotypical, because those workplaces have been created for the norm. So they are places of neuronormativity, which means neurotypical will thrive more
mm,
than neurodivergent. So now
mm,
imagine you've been recruited. So you went through all of those things and you managed to get recruited. How amazing. Then you start in this workplace and you're most likely going to work from an open space.
mm,
This is horrible. Open space are the worst of the worst for many neurodivergent individuals
Mm,
because of the lighting, because of the sound, because of the distraction, because of the fact that you're supposed to change desk every day.
mm,
So for me, even when I was a junior in strategy consulting and I arrived in this big open space, I just marked my territory and I was like, this is my desk. And everyone was like, you're not supposed to have a desk. I was like, didn't know at the time I was autistic. I was like, I don't care. This is my desk. So I put photos and this was my desk. And people knew, and I was by the window, and it's just, we need those spaces and noise canceling headphone and, all of those kind of things, which I intuitively did to survive in an environment that was really not built for my needs.
mm,
That's why you will see a higher rate of burnout in neurodivergent individuals who are expected to work
mm,
in those environments which are not built for them. So again, if we go back to the concept of universal accessibility,
mm,
dimming the light, everyone will benefit from it. Who likes working with those like horrible highlight thing like hospital light where you all have a headache by the end of the day?
mm,
What about we try and bring more dimmer, more accommodating ways of working? Who loves those open space with zero greenery, zero quiet space, zero rooms where you can just decompress? Like those kind of things. I remember when I was in Telstra, I was very often going to the relaxation room, and I
mhm,
would take my meeting from the relaxation room because it was where it was darker and quiet and I
mm.
had no one around me. So that's like, how might we create those kind of environment, which again, it's not costing extra money, it's not extra difficult, it's just making it for 20% right now of your workforce.
Yeah,
And 20% is not 1%. And even if it was 1%, you need to address it. But right now, it's like 20% of the population.
yeah.
And those talented individuals, you want to have them in your workforce because we know that having neurodiverse workforce, which means you have neurotypical and neurodivergent in your workforce,
Mm.
increase the profitability of your business. So you
Absolutely,
want to have
absolutely.
that.
Now, I think you touched on the second question I was going to cover, which is more on in creating inclusive spaces and operating models. You
Yeah.
addressed that up already, so we can move on to the next one, which is why is this important, right? And I think like you brought up the point. Yes, 20% of the population is neurodivergent, and I think like we discussed this before. Yes, this population is something that is seem to be increasing, but it's actually not really increasing, but it's actually the detection methodologies are getting better. The society is becoming more accepting of people calling themselves as neurodivergent, and there's some influence from digital and tech that's actually driving this as well.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing that a lot of the business leaders need to be thinking about is, why do they need to care about this, right? What's at stake for their bottom line if they actually make this a change to accommodate people who are a little different? Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to double click on the fact that if you want to have a workforce that is truly innovative and will help you be up in the curve of quickening transformation, you need to have diverse thinker. And so you need to have a workforce which is diverse in cultural background, in neurotype, in who they are. It's just like, how do you want to have a workforce that is all cisgender white dudes? That's
Mm,
not going to work. The innovation comes from diversity. And that's really something where I think if you close down the door for everyone with neurodivergence, then you are not going to access this innovation, this speed, this being up to the curve. And that's why
mm,
we see lots of entrepreneurs highly indexed as neurodivergent, because to be an entrepreneur is you want to be a diverse thinker, you want to have the drive, you want to be the change maker, you want
mm,
to challenge the norm. And that's where, if you can bring that in your workforce, I forgot now the exact uptake in terms of the percentage of profitability, but I can find it for you. It was on a Deloitte research paper. But the uptake in profitability of having neurodiversity in your workforce is a real big number. It's not, we're not talking.
Actually, yeah, yes, yeah, you're spot on. And I think I haven't got the Deloitte paper, but I do have an access to a McKinsey study that we quote on the 10% Foundation website, which actually said, if you actually consider gender, cultural, ethnic and other types of diversities and make it more inclusive. For the American economy alone, there's nearly $12 trillion of addition in GDP that they could consider, right?
Wow.
So, and that's a massive number, right? So,
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
It is. And this is where like I'm finding the number now. So 30, like when you have neurodiverse team, it's 30% more of productivity than those without them.
Mm,
And for organization who foster neuro inclusion, it's a 19% increase in revenue.
yeah.
And according to a JP Morgan research paper, neurodivergent individual can be 140% more productive than neurotypical. So that's where, why are you closing those doors? If
Mm.
you are an organization with making inaccessible ways from recruitment to onboarding to day-to-day meeting management, ways of working that are non-neuro inclusive, you are missing out on all of this.
That's a great point. And I think, this is what happens when you try to manage by lowest common denominator, right?
Yeah.
So when you manage by lowest common denominator, often you design for lowest common denominator, and when you design for lowest common denominator, you lose the high potential. And then
Exactly.
organization wonder why are businesses not high performing? And that's because you design for the lowest common denominator, right? So if you really want a high performing organization, then organizations need to be thinking about designing for high performance, and that includes making inclusivity part of their consideration for design, including operating model spaces as well as the business processes that they design need to be inclusive of that.
Yeah.
That sets us up nicely for the next question, which I want to go into, which is talking a little bit about the performance-led versus people-led, right? And I'm sure you know these. Most organizations go through these annual performance review cycles, and I think like it's actually chore for people who do it as well as the people who go through it, right? And at the end of the day, like the organization thinks they're actually benefiting from it, but I know from some organizations that have actually scrapped this process completely. It hasn't actually changed even a little bit, just because they scrapped that process. And I'm not gonna name those organizations, but I think like if we talk about it from a performance-led versus to people-led design, and maybe talk about it quantitatively rather than qualitatively rather than quantitatively, and I think that would be a good point to address next. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think this is where, if you really build an inclusive culture, you're knowing what is the motivations of each individual. And for me, what I have noticed through my lived experience and the conversation I had with many leaders who are neurodivergent is what's motivating neurodivergent individual is who we work with and the impact that we have. And we don't really care about individual performance. We care about collective impact.
Mm,
So that's where having more of a people-led culture, people performance, and really looking at how, as a collective, we created something rather than the performance, which is what's your individual performance? What was
mm,
your goal? And how have you achieved this and achieved that? That never motivated me. Whereas
mm,
overall, as an organization, this is what we changed. This is the impact we had. This is
mm,
a contribution of all of us. That was always more beneficial. And that's also backed by the research, which is we
mm,
need to move away from the traditional model of measuring performance one-on-one. And very often the one-on-one, when you get the feedback, they're actually neuronormative feedback that you get.
mm,
If I just go back to my lived experience, like, oh, you don't look at people in the eyes, or you need to be more political and less emotional, or you need
mm,
to, no, this is who I am. So the feedback you're giving me is actually not allowing me to be myself. And my contribution to the all by being myself was we gained more deals and we converted more clients. And I built such big rapport with those clients that then they came back and bought another project for multi-millions of dollars. So it's like they don't see the overall contribution. It's just about your individual
mm,
performance and how you behave, which then is neuronormative expectation of how you should behave,
mm,
rather than what has been your contribution for the whole impact of the business? What
mm,
has been the fact that you've built those kind of deep rapport with a few people is impacting the bottom line overall. So I think we need to really shift the conversation and being mindful when you give performance reviews that you are not reproducing ableism model,
Mm.
which means you are having neurotypical expectation of
From
someone
somebody
who is
else.
neurodivergent.
Yeah.
You wouldn't ask someone in a wheelchair to just stand up or someone who is blind to just see through.
Yeah.
Whereas with invisible disability, you're expecting conformity from those who can't conform to those
Mm.
environments. So yeah, really looking at this way of measuring performance, I think is really important, and also considering that a lot of neurodivergent individuals have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which means we take feedback so deeply
Mm.
and it affects the nervous system and can really impact. So being mindful about how you deliver those feedback, I think that's really important, because when your RSD is triggered as a neurodivergent, you are wasting days and weeks, and you
Mm.
may lose some talents who've been hurt
Mm.
deeply by a poor framing of a feedback.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great point. And I think I love the analogy you made about, asking a disabled person to walk. And I think that sets that's a really clear picture, right? And I think,
But that's what they ask us. They
yeah.
ask me as, an autistic to look in the eye to someone else. I just can't do that. I just can't do it in a sustained way. Or
Mm.
when they ask me to just work in this noisy environment under this bright light, where then I have a migraine and I can't work or I burn out,
Mm.
that's not sustainable. So it's just, yeah, it's really interesting when you start diving deeper into neuronormative expectation in the workforce and you realize that we are not setting it up for success for neurodivergent individual. And as we've seen, if you have neurodiverse workforce, you're going to be way more successful as a business.
You're going to be way more successful as a business, and obviously you're going to create an environment that invites more people into your organization, so you're actually creating better workplaces as a result of that. And I think what we've seen is actually, like, by designing for operating models for people to become more inclusive, what it often boils down to is this, ability to actually think of work as not a standardized, not a large scale entity,
Yeah.
but to think of it as an entity that's made up of small entities, right? So
Yeah.
if you can break down the what the business has to achieve, and we call it descaling the business, right? So
Yeah.
instead of thinking about the business as a whole and trying to design for the whole, if you descale it and find pockets where you can actually do different things differently, and then design your operating model around that, and then use technology to actually aggregate the outcomes and provide that end-to-end business service that you need to provide to your customers, often you get better performance, often you get better results. And I think that sets us up nicely for the next conversation point I want to address, which is more around the role of technology in supporting
Yeah.
neuro inclusivity. And
Yeah.
obviously, with understanding Zoe, what you're doing with the AI-driven platform, it definitely helps to understand better. But I think, like, if you really look at how it can help, not just understanding better, but how it can help, bridge the gap between neurodivergent people and neurotypical people, to actually create that, I guess, cohesion in the workplace that
Yeah.
supports both the divergence and the neurotypical. How do you see that evolving into the future, right? And I guess maybe talk a little bit about what you're doing with Understanding Zoe, and how it helps children who are neurodivergent and their parents, and maybe we can start from that and then move into the workspace.
Yeah. So understanding Zoe is already quite connected to the workplaces. Like we are running some employee value proposition offering Understanding Zoe to employers who are looking to support caregiver of neurodivergent children, because what we know is caregiver of neurodivergent children are highly likely to be themselves neurodivergent because of the hereditary factor, which has been proven by many, many, many research. And you will hear people who are ableist saying that it's a trend, saying that, oh, it's just something we can cure, we can fix. And I am telling you, those people, I just want to swear at them back, because this is very much ableism. But what we know is 80% of parents of neurodivergent children suffer from high level of stress. It's a research from Deakin University. We know that mother of autistic children, 6% of them are less likely to work more than 7 hours a week. And that's something that is quite important. It's like you lose, on top of the neurodivergent, you lose the female leader who are caregiver of neurodivergent children, which is my case. I exited Telstra. I couldn't deal anymore with a high-paced career and at the same time looking after my daughter and her special needs. So there is a big business case for corporate to start supporting parents of neurodivergent children. And that's where Understanding Zoe comes into place, because through Understanding Zoe, the parents, the teachers, the educators, the support worker, the therapist are all surrounding the child and providing the right level of support to the child so that the child can access school, can be schooled in a school system that is supportive of them, so they are not in the school can't group, which happen a lot in many countries, which children who are neurodivergent can't go to school. It's like their nervous system can't deal with it anymore. It's like a zoo for them. And so that's where the accessibility for school will enable those parents to remain in the workforce or to stay in the workforce. So by enabling everyone in the care village to take their part of the load, you enable those neurodivergent parents, most likely themselves are also neurodivergent, to stay in the workforce. And then it enables you as an organization to have higher productivity and higher revenue and higher results and less absenteeism and all of these kind of things. So the case study is already there for corporate. So Understanding Zoe is a platform that will support parents to remain at work whilst supporting inclusion of those children from day dot, from school up to then high school and university and then workplaces. So that's really the beginning of the journey there. So what I have seen as a shift in corporate is when I was at the beginning of my journey as neurodivergent, when I was working in Telstra, neuroinclusion was not at all under the kind of umbrella of things that we're focused on. It was
Yeah.
First Nation, LGBTQI plus, gender diversity, and really ethnical representation.
Mm.
And neuroinclusion now, it's becoming more and more an inclusion point in many policies and in many organizations, because I think they've understood that this is an important point to make. So I'm quite positive in terms of the wave, the tidal wave that rise all boats that's happening right now, where we are as advocates sharing how it is needed. You know, the articles that you mentioned with Jen, which I published initially on my Substack and then got picked up by Smart Company and published by Smart Company, where I was calling out this innovative health conference where I went, which was everything but neuro-inclusive, which means they were blocking us to use our voices and our innovative thinking and our divergent thinking to be
Mm.
part of this movement. So I think more and more people are starting to understand, like many years ago, they started understanding about accessibility needs and gender inclusion and ethnicity inclusion and all of this kind of thing. They're starting to understand that there is another topic, which is neuroinclusion.
Neuroinclusion. Yeah.
So as it starts becoming more and more aware of that point,
Mm.
there is this kind of shift. Like now I see proposal reaching my mailbox around, do you want to speak at this organization? So I've spoken to 4 different big consulting firms
Mm-hmm.
about neurodiversity and how to support neurodiverse workforces and workplaces. So it's not something that would have happened years ago, but
Yeah.
now there is a dedicated line of funding for
Mm.
those organizations to really make sure that they are neuro-inclusive, because similar accessibility is really important for those organizations. It's becoming more and more important. So I'm quite positive, but on the other hand, we make headways in this country, but then we have another country which is going backwards. For instance, the US
Mm.
going so much backwards since Trump is really going after neurodivergence and even saying that autism is a trend and a pandemic and all of this kind of thing, where the DI and the focus on neuroinclusion is just killed in that
Mm.
country, which is very sad.
Yeah.
But let's hope that the movement will take up again, or will be fostered by advocate in the space who will really keep nurturing it. I see that in France, it's also starting to be really picked up, like neurodiversity start to be picked up, where when I was living in France and when I was a strategy consultant, and I left France 11 years ago after my autistic burnout, it was really not something that was part of the conversation. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic, but
Mm, mm.
that's me. I'm always seeing the glass half full rather than half empty. And sometimes I'm being told that I, only see the little portion of the blue sky when everything else is gray. So I'll remain that kind of thinker where I see that it is possible. It is
Man,
possible
it's
with more.
always good to be positive and be, thinking about what can happen rather than, worry about what cannot happen, right?
Yeah.
And it gives hope for everyone, and I'm glad you're that way. And I think in terms of how technology is supporting that, I really like what you're doing with understanding Zoe and building the AI-driven platform. And maybe if you can flip the lens back to some of the workplaces and some of the experiences you've had working in the corporate space, and obviously looking at how understanding Zoe platform is being built, what are the things that you see as kind of parallels that we can bring into some of these workplaces where they can actually use technology to better support
Yeah.
neurodivergent individuals?
Yeah. So we are actually looking at right now with a partner, a potential corporate partner, to adapt Understanding Zoe also to adults in the workplace. Because
Mhm.
if your leader understands you better and understand your accommodation and what are your personal needs, it will make you thrive better in the workplace. So I think
Mm.
it all comes down to understanding. And as I said earlier in this interview, lots of people think that because they've met someone with a who has a with autistic, okay, so I know autism. No, you just met one
One
autistic. So
of it's
it's
a
the same
spectrum,
thing.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's
So
the
it's
same
called a
thing with, oh,
spectrum.
you're French. Oh, so all French people are this way. No, no, no. Or all women are this way, or all men are this way, or all non-binary are this way. I'm like, fuck the generalization. It's time for personalization. We're talking a lot about personalization for consumer, for customers. What about personalization for employees? So that's where having this level of personalization, understanding, and accommodation, I think will be the transformation that understanding that it could bring in workplaces
Mm,
to really have that level of, okay, you are, so this is your, I call this a bingo, like what do you have at the neurodivergent bingo? So you
mm.
are autistic, ADHD, PDA, dyslexic, dyscalculia, whatever you end up in the bingo with under the neurodivergent umbrella. It's like, okay, so those are the things that you need. And so using an app like Understanding Zoe,
Mm,
where they could get all of those information rather than putting it back on the employee,
mm.
and the employee always having to advocate for themselves. Oh, this is exhausting. I am telling you, always having to tell what you need
Mm.
is exhausting.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you wish people would understand you better without having to always, like, what's the most tiring in my current mission and dharma and, purpose right now with Understanding Zoe is having to be always the voice
Mm,
for myself, but also for all of those who are around me who don't have the privilege of being a white cisgender woman
mm,
who is educated,
mm,
who is too exceptional, who can
mm,
then write those articles and so on and so forth. But this is exhausting. Like,
mm.
honestly, I would love for someone else to be an ally.
Yeah.
Like, if you're listening to this and you are not neurodivergent and you are neurotypical, there is a space for you to be an ally. And allyship is you taking some of that load and advocating for us. So next time you see a meeting which is non-neuro inclusive, or you see a conference, like, use your voice as well,
Mm.
please. We need more
Absolutely.
allyship.
Absolutely. We definitely need. And I think I like what you spoke about there in terms of, what other people can do, how other people can do. And also when you start to talk about, how the onus of understanding how you need to get along is actually being put on the neurodivergent person than the
Yeah,
neurotypical person, because
always.
for neurotypical people they already have things a lot easy because the environment's designed for them. And then for neurodivergent people, not only do they have to adapt to that environment, they also have to actually adapt to figuring out how to engage with all these other people, and it becomes so much of a burden, so they're carrying almost like twice the burden when you're trying to put them into teams.
Yeah,
And there's this research that was done sometime back, which I actually read. I can't remember the exact article, but somehow where this article where they said was actually when you're trying to create teams, if you create teams that are made up of more people who are neurodivergent together and more people who are neurotypical together, you actually get the neurodivergent people working well together with each other because they kind of understand each other, right?
Yeah,
And then I'm not saying we should create this segregation, but what I'm advocating here for is actually more, if employers actually understand this, and then if they have an ability to understand how their people are different from each other, through a platform like what you're building, then what they can think about is to actually, when they're creating teams, they can think about, yeah, that we have this one person that might be a little bit different. So instead of that person being the only person that's different, that have to adapt to 7 other people in that team, let's put 2 others in that team if we can find.
yeah,
So that way you make it a bit easier, right? So when you're designing those team designs for your work designs, think about that a little bit, right? And if that information is out there already, let's bring that into the operating model design, right? And that way you are not only making it easier, but obviously because of the creative contribution these neurotypical divergent people have, you get this team that's like going to be like super high performing and super innovative and super divergent thinking that actually drives the change in your organization. So if you really want change makers and change leaders, that's what you need to be create in your organization, right?
yeah, completely.
uh,
Completely. I love
Sorry, I
that.
got on my soapbox a little bit there, but I think that was a really passionate point for me.
I love it. No, it's your podcast. You need to use your voice, Shamara.
Yeah. And I think, like, thinking about the organizations of tomorrow, right? How do we actually make neuro inclusiveness part of how organizations need to think about how they transform themselves, how they reinvent themselves? What's the role that neurodivergent people can play? One question, and I guess the other side of that, what's the one thing that the leaders can think about trying to get the best out of neurodivergent people to be able to want to drive the change in the organizations? And I think that'll probably be the last question we can talk about today. And what are your thoughts around that?
So I think one thing that has been a blessing in disguise of COVID is working from home and flexible work options. I think that's been highly beneficial for neurodivergent, and this is something to consider as the workforce and the ways of working evolve, because remote work, flexible hours, different type of workspaces are, a way to accommodate in your own house for your own needs is actually a big thing that organization can leverage more,
Mm,
rather than thinking that you need to be in the office from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 6 or whatever is, your standard,
yeah.
is actually not getting the best of neurodivergent human.
Mm,
So I think really thinking about how might we leverage more of the flexible work option. Something else that I really want to share with everyone is really thinking about how can you involve neurodivergent individual in the design of your ways of working. Here it's Shamara and Laetitia sharing on a podcast some ideas and some things that we've seen work in other organizations and so on and so forth. But what about creating a task force with individual with lived experience and asking them, how might we adapt our policies? How might
mm,
we adapt our ways of working, our communication? Because lots of people expect communication to be through this and this channel, but is that working for everyone? We all have different ways of communicating, and for some people being over the phone is not the best way, and being on a live call is not the best way. What about asynchronous ways of communicating? Like all of this kind of thing
mm,
could be raised through a workshop where you co-design your ways of working in your organization with your neurodivergent individual. And then you build from the beginning, from the ground up, a culture of inclusivity, rather than having, someone else coming from the outside and telling you this is how. But is that working for your workforce? Is that working for your organization? And so that's where I really want to invite anyone listening to this to just gather, and it doesn't have to be like a long process with 20 different people. You can even start with 5 individuals in your organizations that are neurodivergent, and they openly share that, which already manifest psychological safety in your organization, and you co-design with them the ways of working, and then you go and you continuously improve this, because I am telling you, it is so bad right now that even doing 1% better would be much better for many organizations.
Just to make sure to the audience, Letitia, I didn't ask you to say that, right?
No, you didn't.
But the reason why I'm saying that is because actually, like, the operating model design strategy accelerator that we have in Antosa is doing exactly that. So we go through these 5 phases where shape, discover, jumpstart, scale, and embed. When we go through the strategy accelerator, and in shape we get the leadership into it, and in discover we actually co-design the how we want to structure our operating model. And when we
Yeah,
go into jumpstart, scale, and embed, what we do is actually we experiment this operating model that we co-designed with the team in each part of the business to see how do we need to adapt it to each part of the business, and then we scale it to other parts of the business, right? So
perfect. So do that. Follow Shamara framework.
yeah, exactly. And on that note, I think to me, I think like when I created that framework for how we actually do the operating model design for Anthosa's customers, I wasn't actually thinking about what was happening in the industry. I was actually thinking about what was working for where I've seen things are done really beautifully, really brilliantly, and I just actually adopted those practices when we designed that service. But to tell you hear you say that actually that's what neurotypical typical people as well as neurodivergent people need to be able to create that, co-design that environment where you can get
Yeah,
the best out of them.
yeah.
It's music music to my ears.
I imagine it is. That's
Yeah.
good. Look at me. I didn't know about this. That's perfect.
Thank you again for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts around designing for neuro inclusivity.
Thank
And
you.
it's been a great pleasure talking to you, Laetitia. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamara.
That's it for today's episode of Transformation 2.0. I hope you found insights that will help you lead change with confidence. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more transformational stories to leaders like you. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and if you have a topic or guest you would love to hear on the show, let us know. See you next time.